Welcome to the Let's Talk Growth podcast, where we focus on the topics that can help companies unlock their growth potential. Now here's your host, Bill Hupp.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Let's Talk Growth podcast. As always, I'm your host, Bill Hupp, joined today by Mike Haldane, the founder and president of MarketWise Advising. It's been a minute, Mike. Hope you had a nice holiday season and that you're doing well.
Doing very well. Thanks for asking, Bill.
And today we have another special guest. We're excited to talk to a very interesting entrepreneur who's held a lot of very interesting roles and founded websites, but we'll let him get into it. Mike O'Halloran is our guest on the podcast today. Mike, thanks for joining us and welcome to the Let's Talk Growth podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, well, we'll get into your background right away. Can you just tell the listeners, briefly what you're doing these days?
Sure. So for about the past 15 years, I've been an online publisher. Right now, I have three primary websites. My first website is a sports website called Sports Feel Good Stories, and it focuses on inspirational stories, and then also provides resources for coaches and team parents, everything from quotes to slogans to award certificates. My second website is called Greeting Card Poet, and it is a resource for folks who might be giving a greeting card. For example, maybe there's a neighbor whose son is graduating and you've purchased the card, but you don't know what to say or write inside the card. And so what I've done is I've hired professional writers to give you options as to what to say inside greeting cards for virtually every greeting card occasion, from holidays like Christmas and New Year's to events like graduations and baptisms. And then my third site, I actually partner with a gentleman by the name of Greg Johnson. We've come up with an entertainment site called List Caboodle. And List Caboodle, the focus is, as the name suggests, on lists. So there was a trend started a few years back where any article that featured lists, this tended to be more widely read. And so our thinking was to not fight that trend, but to embrace it. And so we came up with List Caboodle. So all of the content, all of the articles ranging from entertainment to kids' jokes are in the form of lists. And so what I do with the three sites is rely primarily on an advertising model. And I've partnered with an organization called Raptive, and they're the largest ad network in the US. And what they do is go out and seek advertisers for my website and about 5,000 other folks like me. And together as this one group of publishers, we're able to enjoy benefits that we would not be able to enjoy if we were going at it separately. So that's primarily what I'm doing. My one sports website, Sports Feel Good Stories, also has an online store where I sell practice plans for coaches, off-season workouts for players, and then award certificates for kind of the season-ending banquets where volunteer coaches are trying to recognize players and the season's accomplishments.
I'm curious, you have four daughters, each of whom are grown now, but grew up playing sports. How did that experience as a father help inform what you thought the marketplace was missing?
Well, it's really kind of how I got started in the whole website arena. So, I had worked in marketing, and I recognized that the whole website marketing had become a big deal, and I thought I was actually kind of a little late to the market. But I knew I wanted to get smarter about it. I knew I wanted to do that by starting my own website. And so as I was considering what topic to address, I coached all of my daughters in basketball and a couple other sports. But one of the things I recognized was I was coaching, I guess it was my youngest or second youngest daughter in basketball, and I would frequently send out interesting articles to the players' parents. And I'd ask them usually, to read the article, to their daughter and share it with them. And I sent out one article about a young gentleman by the name of Jason McElwain, and he was this student manager for a basketball team in upstate New York. And in the last game of his senior year, the coach has a reward to Jason for his 4 years of service of doing towels and collecting basketballs for the team during practices and whatnot. Let him know that he was going to let him play in a game. And it just so happened Jason had this incredible game where he scored 20 points in the last 4 minutes of the game. It was this great story, and it was captured in a short news clip. And so I sent the link to the video to the parents, and they all came back and said, not only did their daughters love the video, but they were also touched by it. And so when I was considering, what should I focus on, I decided to zero in on these inspirational sports stories, just because I thought they had a fairly broad market. They were very positive. And so I think, if I hadn't been coaching my daughter's team, I wouldn't have recognized that opportunity. And so a lot of the content that I've created on the sports site, especially, is reflective of having gone through teen parent situations. So I made a major pivot in with my sports site in the early going. Initially, I was just trying to write any great sports inspirational story that I could come upon, and there were very many, and they became popular with the news morning shows and that type of thing. But what I discovered was there's kind of an expression: you can't out New York Times the New York Times. And other publications, other news agencies were just much better at covering all those things because they had more resources, more people daily working and looking out for these opportunities. And so I think as a result of being a team parent, I decided I would focus on things that, if you were I was a team parent for my daughter's tennis team, and we needed things like a tennis slogan for, apparel that they would wear for the season ahead. And when I went looking for tennis slogans on the internet, there just wasn't much there. And so one of my first articles was coming up with various tennis slogans. And pretty soon I expanded that into other sports, and then went on to quotes and jokes and those types of things. And what I found is that these type of topics were more perennial, more evergreens, right? So whereas a news story about a kid playing basketball might be very hot for a week, ultimately, it flashed and peaked at that week, and then after that had very, minimal traffic, if any. Whereas things that were of a perennial nature, like tennis slogans, football slogans, parents of kids with different ages would come looking for that type of information each year. And so it wasn't like I was starting from scratch with each article. And so I could focus in on making each one of those articles more in depth, better, and as a result, those ranked better and drove more traffic to the site.
How do you think AI will impact the future of your work?
Well, it's already affected website publishing to a great extent. So, so what AI did in the early going was enabled many publishers to go from publishing maybe a handful of articles a day to be able to publish hundreds and hundreds. And so Google probably overreacted to that and switched their algorithm just because they didn't want to be able to handle all of that inflow of new pages to, to go through and validate and put up. So it's already affected the algorithm to a large extent. But right now, and Bill, you and I have had conversations about AI, but it's a big deal. So right now, so I'm used to working with external writers, and right now, man, AI is really good on the writing front, depending on your topic, right?
Right.
But what I would pay, a couple $100 for in the past, I can get it at the tip of my fingertips with, good commands and, and some editing, right?
Yeah.
So I would say AI from just a writing perspective is probably, I think it's very competitive with average writers. I would say, the best writers still always have, their niche, and there's always going to be an editing need. But it's going beyond that, right? With visuals, and I think we're moving to a point where it's going to get into, work commands and all those types of things. I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg. And so, the phrase that I've heard that I like is that, AI might not replace you, but the person who knows AI might replace you. And
Right.
so, folks really need to get behind this and embrace it. And there's just so many applications, and I don't feel like I've touched, 5% of it, right? So it's kind of like when you're given that first Apple computer, and you're starting to use it and it seems great, and that's true, but you're just not using it at an expert level. Well, with AI, I think there's few people using it at an expert level, and certainly it's not me. But there's just a lot of potential applications. I think it's very, very interesting what lies ahead.
Yeah, so Mike, I love what you're doing. I think the world needs more of this. So very much appreciate what you're spending your time on these days. I did want to talk a little bit more about Raptive and how that has impacted the success of the websites that we're talking about. Can you maybe just give a little bit more detail as to how that all works?
Sure. So one of the great things I think about the early days of website publishing is that many people were very open with how they went about making a go of it with a website, right? And they
Yep.
were just incredibly transparent. They would show exactly how they made money, what expenses they went through, and they would line list it and share it, for the world to see. Well, I was tracking one of these websites. It was a cooking website. It was a young couple. I think she was a teacher and he was kind of this website expert. But they explained their, kind of how their revenues were working. And at one point, I saw that they were collecting a pretty sizable chunk of money from an organization called AdThrive. And AdThrive ultimately evolved and became Raptive.
Got
And,
it.
and so I went and explored what AdThrive was all about. And it's essentially kind of how I described earlier. It's an ad network where they pool together publishers, and with that group of publishers are able to go to advertisers and say, here, look, here's who we have, this big of an audience, this is what our audience looks like. And it's just, instead of it being at one website, it's spread out across thousands, right?
Yeah.
And so when I signed up for them, they suggested that they would be able to improve my ad revenue by a factor of three. And not too many business people would frown at that concept. And
Right.
so I applied, and thankfully was accepted into their program. So I started off with the first two websites, Sports Feel Good Stories and Greeting Card Poet. And what I discovered was, one, not only did they deliver on the promise of delivering ad revenues that were three times what I previously earned, but it was just an incredible time saver and kind of headache preventer. So before, I was out there myself trying to approach various advertisers, and there's a lot to it. There's not only the marketing and the sales part of it, but there was also the technical aspect. So you might partner with someone and they would send you advertising code to include on your site, what if you were able to reach an agreement. But there were some bad players out there, and sometimes the code wasn't what they said it was, and it would direct people to odd sites that weren't ones that you would want to partner with.
Yeah.
So what I ended up doing with what is now Raptive was great. So they're taking out all the technical worries. They went out and reached a level of advertisers that I couldn't reach on my own. And so it just freed up all of my time, a lot of my time, I'll say, a significant amount, just to focus on my own website and the content on it. But they've just done a nice job, not only with that, but then they've also kind of elevated their game to where they're trying to educate us on a variety of the issues and opportunities that face independent publishers, and there are many. And so just by having an organization behind me that is out there looking out for our interest is a tremendous value.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So I would assume that with Raptive, or really I guess just advertising in general, that having hit a certain threshold for audience is important. Can you talk a little bit about how you've grown your audience over time?
Sure. So a good part of it for me has been an understanding of search engine optimization. So when I go to various Raptive conferences, it's kind of an interesting process, because everyone, has reached a certain level of traffic and had success with their website, seemingly, but they've all taken a different approach, right? So like I would encounter folks that were just like had developed huge audiences on Facebook, or some were, Pinterest, mavericks. They were just able to develop this huge built-in audience from one social media platform and drive it to their website. And then, I kind of fell more into, I didn't really have particular skills in either of those two social media. But I did have a pretty good understanding of how SEO, search engine optimization, worked. And for those of you who don't know what that's all about, it's really kind of understanding what a search engine like Google or Bing wants in the form of both content and formatting of that content, so that your particular site elevates in the rankings. So if you operated a Italian restaurant in Minneapolis and folks did a search for Italian restaurant Minneapolis, there's a big difference between ranking first, second, or third versus being on the second page. In fact, there's a saying that the best place to bury a dead body is on page 2 of Google search results. But like if you're number one, the numbers and percentages have changed, but you might get like 40% of the traffic, and if you're the number 2 position, you might get 20%. And if you're the number 3 position, you might get 10% of the people who click on those search result pages, right? And so it's a little bit, to draw a sports analogy, it's a little bit like the Olympics. The people who are in the top 3 spots get all the endorsements, right? Well, if you're in the top 3 spots on Google search results, you get all the traffic, right? And so it really helps. I actually had done, quite a bit of consulting just on SEO, folks, to help out both big and small companies improve their results. And so I applied a lot of what I learned from consulting with clients and to my own site. And actually, my own sites were kind of a little test market where I could try different approaches as to what would work, what would drive traffic. And it's a constantly evolving process, because Google and other search engines will change their algorithm, right? So at one point, way back, it was really important to list the term that you were hoping to elevate in the search rankings for repeatedly in an article or a post. Well, at a certain point, people kind of overplayed that hand, and then Google started punishing you if you were, kind of over stacking those words into your page, right?
Yeah.
And so has Google and other search engines changed your algorithm? Publishers and those practicing SEO need to constantly be changing their approach as to what worked and what will drive additional traffic.
So then how do you stay up with the changes in the algorithms as they happen? And then what impact does that have on your content? I would imagine you're trying to balance, meaningful content with content that is meaningful but still gets the traffic that you're wanting to have.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of tools that you can use to find out what it is that people search for. Even the search engines themselves will share with you, what terms are frequently searched for. And so, for a particular category, let's say for my website, Greeting Card Poet, I might search a particular holiday, right? And let's take Christmas as an example. So under Christmas, maybe the top search terms are Christmas cards, related to my site at least, Christmas wishes, Christmas blessings, Christmas captions. And so for each of those, I can get a feel for how much monthly traffic is searching for those terms, right? So I want to both balance, as you suggest, I want to both balance the amount of traffic with the fit for my website, right? So if I went into, let's say Christmas statues, well, I don't really, Greeting Card Poet isn't about statues at all. It might have a fair amount of traffic, but it's pretty unrelated to my site. So Google's not going to really be overwhelmed, and in fact they might even punish you for kind of stepping too far away from your core competency, right? So you always kind of want to be within your wheelhouse or an arm's length away. If you go 3 arms lengths away, probably not going to help you too much, right?
Yeah.
So so there is a balance, and then also a little bit has to do with how you can kind of set yourself apart. You might look and for those terms, they'll also show you who, and you can just do it yourself. You can just Google the term. So if I wanted to do well on the term Christmas wishes, I could just Google that term and see who's ranked first, second, and third. Review those websites and see, is that something that I feel I can compete with, right?
Yeah.
So some of it is both the traffic to the site, some of it is the fit to your particular website, right? Or the traffic for the term, the fit to your website. And then also, I think it's a little bit of, can I pull this off? I guess in some ways it's not dissimilar to like a job search, right? When people are evaluating a job, one of the things they're probably looking at is, can I do well at this job? And in a similar vein, I'm kind of looking at, for that term, can I do better or at least get to one of the top 3 positions for that particular term?
Right.
Mike, you've also been, for the last 5 years, the president of Magnetic Poetry. What is magnetic poetry?
So magnetic poetry is kind of words on small little magnets that people usually place on their fridge, and they can shuffle the words around and form verses and essentially little poems, right? So the in the toy business and the gift business, because there's not a lot of advertising money, it's really important to have a good founding story, right? And I always thought magnetic poetry had one of the better founding stories. So the gentleman who invented it was from Matamidi, Minnesota, a guy by the name of Dave Capel. And as the story goes, he was in a little band, and he was the writer for his musical band. And he kind of had a writer's block. He'd gotten some of the songs out he wanted, but was struggling. So he read about a technique that David Bowie used, which was to cut out words from magazines and newspapers and shuffle them around, and you'll get ideas for a verse, right? So Dave started doing that, and as the story goes, he had allergies, and so he'd sneeze, and all the words that he'd cut out and laid out on a book would just kind of blow away. And so, which came, we evolved that to our tagline, which was it started with a sneeze. But so Dave ended up pasting the words on little magnets and used a cookie sheet and was able to use the magnets and shuffle the words around easily. And if he sneezed, they didn't blow away. Well, as it turns out, his roommate wanted to use the cookie sheet to throw in a pizza or something. So Dave ended up throwing all of his cutout and magnetic tiles up on the fridge. And he had some people over at the house, and they started playing with it. And they were like, I want a kit like this. And so I think Dave heard that enough times and ultimately made about 100 kits and took them to an art festival. And I think they sold out before it hit noon at that art festival. And so he decided, I'm gonna go into business. So that was kind of the founding story for Magnetic Poetry. But it was a fun company to work with. At the time, we were sourcing in the U.S., so we could go from an idea for a product to have it being seen at Barnes and Noble within like a 4-month process. And so it was a lot of fun coming up with new product ideas. We had 100 plus gift reps across the country, and so I would manage those. And then, the whole idea was, we had this kind of winner in magnetic poetry, and so the idea was to try to expand to add additional products that would succeed at retail.
What did you do specifically for magnetic poetry?
So I was president. So you're kind of a player coach with a small company. So we had maybe 20 people. So I really headed up our marketing and sales efforts, and then also new product efforts. The owner was kind of removing himself a little bit. He probably worked about 30% of the time, and he focused on new business too. But so I was calling on our major accounts myself. So folks like Barnes and Noble and Target and Borders Books. So we did well in bookstores because of the literary nature of our product. We were kind of a PR dream, because if you think of the background of many journalists, they were in English and journalism majors, and they had a kind of a built-in love of words. So, here comes along a product that's all focused about words. It's about open-ended play. So journalists and teachers, just loved our product. And so we did some fun things on the PR front. At one point, Madonna had written a song, and when we compared her lyrics to one of our kits, it was like 98% of the words included in the song were in our kit. And so we sent her a note and said it would be kind of nice to have a little tip of the hat to us, and their response was a little different. And so we ended up hiring a mathematician to prove that it was pretty likely that she used our kit to create her song. And so we got some PR out of that. At one point, we sent 3 Volkswagen Bugs across the country. All the bugs were covered with oversized magnetic poetry, and along the way they threw poetry events. There was like 2 college kids in each car. We called them EMTs, emergency metaphor technicians. And they would do everything from, they had magnetic poetry tattoos. So they put a little short verse on little kids' foreheads with the tattoos, and we challenged kids to come up with poems themselves. So that was a lot of fun too. So we had a good time. It was just it was a fun product because there was a real passion for the product.
It sounds like a great time and just the perfect kind of creative outlet. Any business, though, no matter how fun, has inherent challenges. What were the biggest challenges when it came to magnetic poetry?
Well, so the challenges were we didn't have a big budget to come up with new products. So we were, for the most part, we were a little tied in how big of a new product line we could launch. We did our expenses were fairly minimum. The biggest expense was really the cost of the product itself, and so we ended up shifting our production to China to reduce the cost of our product. So we cut our expenses in half on the product by taking it overseas, and so that helped a lot. But it was I think the struggle was taking it to the next level. It's like we had the one big product success, and it was tougher getting to the next level. So we looked all over for new products. So when I was traveling with the company, my kids, you mentioned I have 4 daughters, they would always want something to attach to their backpack. It was kind of a trend at that time to attach little doodads and toys and whatnot to their backpacks. So I always found myself at LaGuardia Airport trying to find something with an attachable keychain for my kids. And so finally, I kind of paired together the idea that magnetic poetry needed new products with this concept, and we came up with the concept of backpack poetry or backpack games, right? Instead of putting little magnets on the fridge, we created this portfolio. Think of like a one-fold 4-inch by 4-inch square with lively graphics on the front. And then inside you'd flip it open. It was the playing surface for a game. And so we started off with magnetic poetry and did some themed ones. But then we realized that people kind of like the format more so than the magnetic poetry play. So we just started putting in more popular traditional toys. So you could play chess with the backpack games, or checkers, or hangman. So we worked our way up to where we had about 36 SKUs, and so that with that we sold, I think it was over 750,000 units at retail. And so that was kind of the challenge. How could you parlay an existing equity and try to drive revenue?
Yeah, I mean, it's, even though you want to come up with something sort of super unique or whatever, you can never go wrong with the classics, right?
Right.
I know from previous conversations that you and I have had in the past, you've talked about how you invented new gifts and toys in kind of a similar way. Were you involved in these inventions, and how is that process usually?
Yeah, so I came up with the backpack poet concept. So we had a small team of that we would use to develop programs or new product ideas at Magnetic Poetry. So some were collaborative, and some you may have started off thinking as a group, but then when you broke off, you might come up with an idea on your own. I think I personally invented over 50 new products at Magnetic Poetry. Some of them are easier than others, right? You and I and Mike could sit down and come up with a new magnetic poetry themed kit, around, you name it, football or whatever. And, that wouldn't take much creative talent. So these were products that might have a magnetic focus, but be slightly different in some ways. One of the products that we launched that was a little different is that we tried to put magnetic poetry in the garden. We came up with a concept called poetry stones, and so this was a a little kit where gardeners or people who enjoyed poetry could form little bricks, and then using plastic letter devices press down and create letters and then words in these stones. And so the cement would harden and they'd have these tinted tan stones. And you could either label your vegetables, or what we would have enjoyed more was like put a verse of poetry into your garden. And I've done some on my own. With my brother, we launched a 4 product line trivia game called Smart Attack, and so this was a game where you just challenge kids for during the long car rides to answer questions related and age appropriate. We had 4 titles. I think it was animal, U.S., world, and general. And so they were questions that were designed for that age group, and then we included the answers right on the page. My brother and I used to play Jeopardy as a kid, and and the some of the elements of the game we didn't even use, right? They had all the format where you could lift up the $100 question, and we just threw all that stuff aside and just used the question and answer book, because that was what was most interesting to us. And so we kind of took the same concept and just made it question and answers, very easy to find the answers, and we did pretty well with that. I think we sold some 20,000 units.
That's phenomenal. I was gonna say it sounded like a Jeopardy for kids.
Yeah, Mike, the last experience we're going to talk about, and I just have to say, your set of experiences are extremely interesting and colorful.
Oh, thanks.
So I really appreciate you sharing all of this with us and with our audience. The Learning Company this one is near and dear to my heart. And the reason I say that is because I have very fond memories of the business that I was involved with back in the 90s with my dad and my brother, where we built computers for home use and business use, and built servers and set up networks and that sort of thing. But for the home users, we sold and marketed a whole lot of Learning Company products. And at the time, it was all about families bringing computers into the home for the first time, and many times it was for educational purposes, because this was, back in the early 90s. A lot of times it was their first computer, and they had kids that were, learning to read and that sort of thing. And the Learning Company's products were extremely popular. And so, as I understand it, you were director of marketing for the Learning Company. I don't remember what the date range was for that, but maybe just tell us a little bit about your experience there, and maybe for the sake of audience members that don't know what the Learning Company is, maybe just talk a little bit about what they do.
Sure. So I started off as director of marketing for MEC. MEC is based in the Twin Cities, and MEC is best known for a product that's actually has been in the news recently, because they're making Apple's making a full-length movie on it, and that's the Oregon Trail. So the Oregon Trail is probably the most successful educational software product of all time. And MEC was founded by a group of like ex-teachers and educators. When I joined, we were probably like a $30-40 million company. But then within a year or two, we were acquired by a company called SoftKey, who the president of SoftKey was Kevin O'Leary of Shark Tank fame. And when they purchased MEC, so SoftKey is buying MEC, they also bought Compton's Encyclopedia, us, and then the Learning Company out of California. And so when they looked at all of the names, let's see, we got MEC, SoftKey, Compton's. Yeah, the Learning Company sounded just a little better, right? It was pretty easy to understand. And so Kevin O'Leary and Michael Perrick was the CEO. Their strategy was a roll-up strategy. They wanted to buy software companies, especially focus on educational software companies and productivity companies, and get to $1 billion in revenue size, which they accomplished. Ultimately, we ended up selling to Mattel. And so it was a huge deal. And when you hear at the beginning of Shark Tank how Kevin O'Leary leveraged a $10,000 loan into millions and millions of dollars, that this was the deal that we're talking about. And so with the other titles, so the Learning Company was probably best known for Reader Rabbit. So with Reader Rabbit, MEC, Compton's Encyclopedia, we had foreign language. We were clear and away the #1 educational software company. And then we were also in the top 3 on many other entities as well. So yeah, it was like a fascinating place to work. We were going through acquisitions at a very quick rate. And so as director of marketing, at this point, I had shifted into director of channel marketing for the Learning Company. And so with my boss, the VP of marketing, a lady by the name of Kathy Quinby Johnson, our challenge was to kind of take all of these different companies and put it into a manageable message to retailers so that our sales team could explain, oh, you got this, you got that. And so we had to kind of do some branding exercises and group products into families. But it always seemed to work, each quarter, as we are on the verge of trying to sell ourselves to a bigger partner, it always seemed we were just a little shy of hitting our number. And then there'd be some Hail Mary and boom, we hit the number and would move on. And so it was a very successful venture for all the MEC folks who stayed on and for all the Learning Company employees. And it was one of those industries too, where it was just constantly evolving, right? We were going from discs to CD-ROMs to online. And so, it was a challenge as you were doing your product planning as to, exactly how, and you had the whole Windows PC versus Mac and Apple. So there was a big challenge on just staying on top of the format of the product to create, as well as, where you should put a lot of your emphasis behind. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the 90s saw a lot of transition as far as, format and the evolution of the internet and that sort of thing. I think when we first started selling the products as a retailer, by the way, and I do remember those packages because we would oftentimes put together those packages or resell those packages when somebody bought a new computer for the home. But at first they were on 3.5-inch floppy disks, and then that evolved to CD-ROMs, and I think probably at some point DVDs. But then the internet started to take over, and so yeah, we experienced that same evolution, and it was an exciting time for sure. Probably pretty similar to what we're seeing with AI right now in the 2020s. But
yeah, no doubt. A lot of folks will ask me about what Kevin O'Leary is like because they've gotten a taste of him on Shark Tank.
Well, I was going to ask, what was it like working with Mr. Wonderful?
Well, it wasn't like a daily meeting occurrence, but right. Once a quarter, we got together as a sales and marketing team, and Kevin would come out, and he would always give the opening statement, and it most often always ended with him announcing to everyone that we needed to squash the cockroaches, which was his enduring term for our competition. But Kevin was a very smart guy. He was also very charismatic on TV, even back then. We sold educational software on like the Home Shopping Network. And the first go round, we put our VP of sales on, and he sold, X amount in 10 minutes or whatever. Kevin had, the next time we put Kevin on, and he had the same amount of time and sold, I think, about 10 times the amount of software. So he just has a way of putting things very concisely. I think you'll find that he's not for everyone. Some people find him a little harsh and very black and white on matters related to money. But he was always very creative, very quick, and very astute at picking out business opportunities and moving quickly to leverage our resources behind them.
Yeah, that's great. So as you think back at that set of years, that experience with the Learning Company, what's maybe your favorite success story?
Well, my favorite story was actually just right before. So I was working at Mac, and like I said, we're this $35 million company. We didn't have a lot to offer potential tie-in partners, but what we did have to offer was kind of, educational software was kind of both trendy and high tech. And it was also pretty high ground. We're talking about educating kids. We're not talking about selling sugar water or, what some other partners might deliver. So
Yeah.
I would approach other companies and try to position Mac and the Oregon Trail as a potential tie-in partner to create awareness and be able to put something on our package to help drive sales. So I think my proudest accomplishment is I partnered with Famous Footwear, which was at the time the largest shoe retailer in the country. They had 900 stores, and they ended up purchasing outright, I think it was $420,000 worth of the Oregon Trail, which they gave out as CDs. And then they also gave us a discount that we put on a sticker on the outside of other software packages, which would, if you, I think it gave them a rebate if they purchased a pair of shoes. And so, the net, for a company our size, the extra unexpected $420,000 of revenue was a big deal at the time. But then it was also a sign that educational software was becoming a bigger deal. At about the same time, we tied in with Cheerios and got on Honey Nut Cheerios box. And so when we merged with the learning company, they're looking at what we were doing. I think it helped us a lot to be able to say, one, we're making these tie-ins with significant companies and legitimizing the educational software category.
Right. Very cool.
Well, Mike, this has been a really delightful conversation. Like Mike Haldane said, just full of colorful and fascinating stories from your wide-ranging and interesting career. For those who want to learn more about your work or get in touch with you, how can they do so?
You could go to any of my sites. So check out sportsfeelgoodstories.com, greetingcardpoet.com, listcaboodle.com, or check me out on LinkedIn. And that would be great.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Let's Talk Growth. If you enjoyed it, feel free to rate and review the podcast. You can get new episodes and listen to old ones by visiting marketwiseadvising.com/podcasts. Let's Talk Growth is owned, produced, and published by MarketWise Advising, LLC.